I do think there's an economic element to our democracy that we have to pay attention to. Our democracy is not going to be healthy with the levels of inequality that we've seen generated from globalization, automation, the decline in unions, obscene inequality. You think about news of the day. Generally, we're not talking about news of the day, but right now we have 24-hour coverage, and I understand it, of this submarine, this submersible that tragically is right now lost at the bottom of the sea. At the same time, right here, just off the coast of Greece, we had 700 people dead, 700 migrants who were apparently being smuggled into here. And it's made news, but it's not dominating in the same way. And in some ways, it's indicative of the degree to which people's life chances have grown so disparate. It's very hard to sustain a democracy when you have such massive concentrations of wealth. And so part of my argument has been that unless we attend to that, unless we make people feel more economically secure and we're taking more seriously the need to create ladders of opportunity and a stronger safety net that's adapted to these new technologies and the displacements that are taking place around the world, if we don't take care of that, that's also going to fuel the kind of mostly far-right populism, but it can also potentially come from the left, that is undermining democracy because it makes people angry and resentful and scared.
President Biden, a man who you know extremely well, yes, has made the defense of democracy the sort of centerpiece of his administration. It just so happens that right now there's also not just threats to democracy by dictatorships and autocrats, but also illiberal democracy as well. Yeah. He has called the president of China a dictator, and they're sticking with it. He is also hosting, as we speak, the Prime Minister of India, Modi, who is considered autocratic or at least illiberal Democrat. What is the point, I guess, or how should a president engage with those kinds of leaders, either in the naming of them or in the dealing with them?
Look, it's complicated. The president of the United States has a lot of equities. And when I was president, I would deal with figures, in some cases who were allies, who, if you pressed me in private, do they run their governments and their political parties in ways that I would say are ideally democratic? I'd have to say no.
You want to name names?
No, of course not. But you had to do business with them because they're important for national security reasons. There are a range of economic interests. I dealt with China to get the Paris Accords done. I dealt with Modi to get the Paris Accords done because I think climate change is something that transcends any particular momentary issues. It's a problem that humanity's got to deal with over the next several decades in a serious way. I do think that it is appropriate for the President of the United States, where he or she can, to uphold those principles and to challenge, whether behind closed doors or in public, trends that are troubling. And so I'm less concerned about labels than I'm concerned about specific practices. I think it is important for the President of the United States to say that if you have Uyghurs in China who are being placed in mass camps and re-educated, quote unquote, that's a problem. That's a challenge to all of us, and we have to pay attention to it. I think it is true that if the president meets with Prime Minister Modi, then the protection of the Muslim minority in a majority Hindu India, that's something worth mentioning. Because, and by the way, if I had a conversation with Prime Minister Modi, who I know well, part of my argument would be that if you do not protect the rights of ethnic minorities in India, then there is a strong possibility India at some point starts pulling apart. And we've seen what happens when you start getting those kinds of large internal conflicts. So that would be contrary to the interests not just of Muslim India, but also Hindu India. So I think it's important to be able to talk about these things honestly. You're never going to have things are never going to be as clean as you'd like, right, because the world is complicated. Our existing democratic institutions are creaky, and we're going to have to reform them.
So let's ask about the creaky or not institutions in the United States.
Yeah.
The spectacle of a former president being federally indicted. Mm-hmm. How is the rest of the world, the democratic world, maybe even the non-democratic world, meant to interpret that indictment and indeed the fact that a federal indictee is able to run for the highest office in the land, maybe even the world?
It's less than ideal, right? But the fact that we have a former president who is having to answer to charges brought by prosecutors does uphold the basic notion that nobody's above the law. And the allegations will now be sorted out through a court process. And I think I'm more concerned when it comes to the United States with the fact that not just one particular individual is being accused of undermining existing laws, but that more broadly we've seen, whether it's through the gerrymandering of districts, whether it's trying to silence critics through changes in legislative process, whether it's attempts to intimidate the press, a strand of anti-democratic sentiment that we've seen in the United States. It's something that is right now most prominent in the Republican Party, but I don't think it's something that is unique to one party. I think there is a less tolerance for ideas that don't suit us, and it's sort of the habits of a free and open exchange of ideas, and the idea that we all agree to the rules of the game, and even if the outcomes aren't always the ones we like, we still abide by those rules. I think that's weakened since I left office, and we're going to need to strengthen them again.